We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 103b. On the previous Amid, the Gemara had asked, how could it be that Yael was with Sisera, even if it was for good intentions, but still she's deriving pleasure from Avera, from being together with Sisera? And the Gemara answers, when there are things that are beneficial for the Rishoim, so Rahi Eitzel Tzadikim, automatically that's considered bad for the Tzadikim. Shenemar, like the Pasuk says, this Pasuk is by Lavan and Yaakov. It says, Hishamar Lecha Pentadabrim Yaakov Mitov Ad Ra. So Lavan is warned not to speak with Yaakov from good to bad. So Bishalom Marai, I understand why he can't speak bad to Yaakov Lechai. That makes sense. Elatov Amaylo, but why can't he speak good to Yaakov? Elashmami no, rather don't we see from here, Tovosan Shal Rishoim, that when something is beneficial for the Rishoim, so Rahi Eitzel Tzadikim, that's bad for the Tzadikim. But the Gemara still questions this. Bishalom Mahasam Dilma Madker Le Shemad Avodas Kochavim. I understand over there, because the issue is maybe Lavan's going to mention the name of his Avodah Zarah, so that's why he can't speak Mitov either. Elohacham Ma'iraika, but over here, what bad is there? In other words, it is to say, if she's getting benefit, if she's getting pleasure from being together with Sisera, what is the evil that is with her? And the Gemara answers, the kashadi bazuama. The reason is because she's contaminated just by lying together with Sisera, just by having relations with Sisera. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yochanan says, B'shah sheba nachash al chava, at the moment that the nachash had relations with chava, hitel bazuama, so there was a contamination in her. Yisrael, when it comes to the Jewish people, sha'amdu al Har Sinai, that they stood by Har Sinai, paska zu amasan, so their contamination has stopped. Ovdei kochavim shelo amdu b'Har Sinai, but the Ovdei kochavim, they did not stand at Har Sinai, lo paska zu amasan, so their contamination, it never ceased. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Chalza b'minol she'eno shelo v'chulu. It said if the person does chalitza with a shoe that is not his, it is still going to be kosher. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, na'alo, it says his shoe. Ein li yalin na'alo, so I only know that it's good if it's his own shoe. Na'al shel kol adam minayin. How do we know that he can use anyone else's shoe? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, na'al. It says in the pasuk, na'al twice. Mikol makom, that means in any fashion. It can be someone else's shoe as well. Imkein ma Talmud Lomar na'alo. If so, why does the pasuk say na'alo? It means to say na'alo haroilo, means to say that it's a shoe that fits him. Prat legadol shein yachol lahalachbo, that would exclude a shoe that is too big, that he can't walk in. Uprat lekaton shein ochofet rov raglo, and to exclude a small shoe that doesn't cover the majority of his foot. Uprat lesandal hamisulium, and to exclude a sandal hamisulium, which is she'ein lo akev. The sandal hamisulium is a sandal that does not have a heel, and therefore also it's not fit to walk in. And so those kinds, that's what the word na'alo comes to exclude. But again, it doesn't have to actually belong to the individual. And the Gemara continues, Abaya havekoi kame de Rav Yosef. Abaya was standing in front of Rav Yosef. I saw Yevamot lachlot, so Yevamot came in order to do chalitza. Amar le, so he said to him, meaning Rav Yosef said to Abaya, Havle sandalach, go give this man your sandal. So Yoav le sandal the smallest, so he gave him his left sandal. Amar le, so Rav Yosef said to Abaya, Emor domer Rabbanan di'evet. I understand the Rabbanan say that b'di'evet it's okay to use a left sandal. Lechatchila miyamar, but lechatchila, is it really good to do that? Amar le, so Abaya said back to him, Yachi, if so, sandal she'ein shalo nami. When it comes to a sandal that doesn't belong to him also. Emor domer Rabbanan di'evet. I understand the Rabbanan say that's okay b'di'evet, but lechatchila miyamar, is that lechatchila in the first place? He should be using my sandal. Amar le, so Rav Yosef said back to Abaya, Hacha ka'amina lach. Here's what I was saying to you. Have le va'akni le. I was saying give it to him and transfer the ownership to him temporarily, and then it would be done in the ideal fashion. And Rashi over here explains, Yoav le the smaller, so Abaya gave him the left sandal, b'miskavin of it. He actually did this on purpose. The lo svira le Abaya, the sandal she'eno shalom, mutter lechatchila, because Abaya held that a sandal that doesn't belong to the guy is not mutter lechatchila, so he was trying to send this message that this is not the best way to do it. So Amar le Rav Yosef, so then Rav Yosef said back, Emor damer Rabbanan b'masnisin b'shel smol biyamin chalitzas kshera. Granted that we say in the Mishnah that if you use a left shoe and you put it on the right foot, so that's going to be okay b'di'evet, that's only okay di'evet. But lechatchila miyamar, is that going to be okay at a lechatchila level? And so then again Rav Yosef says, Havle va'akni le, what I really meant was transfer the ownership, sheyehei shelo b'matan, in other words, give it to him as a gift, and then that will be the ideal method of chalitza. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, sandal shalates, if you use a sandal of wood, that's also kosher. Man Tana, so who's the Tana of our Mishnah? Amar Shmuel, Shmuel says, Rabbi Meir, the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Mesechet Shabbos, Hakiteya Yotze Bekav Shalo, Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you have an amputee, so he's allowed to walk on Shabbos with his prosthetic, which is again, it's made out of wood. It's considered basically to be a shoe. According to Rabbi Meir, just like you're allowed to walk with clothing on Shabbos, it's not considered carrying, so too you can take the prosthetic, you can use the prosthetic. Rabbi Yossi says no, it's forbidden because apparently Rabbi Yossi does not consider it to be a shoe, and therefore it would seem that our mission is Rabbi Meir. But the Gemara says, Avua de Shmuel Omer, the father of Shmuel says, B'mechupa or, it could be that our Mishnah, we're talking about a sandal shalates, it's a wooden sandal, but it is covered in hide, it's covered in leather, v'divrei hakol, and then our Mishnah can follow all opinions, it can follow Rabbi Yossi as well. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Rav Papi says, Mishmei de Rav, in the name of Rava, sandal hamuskor, let's say you have a sandal that is quarantined. In other words, it was set aside because we're not sure whether it's tzaras or not, and the Kohen's going to inspect it later to determine whether that is actually tzaras. So lo tachlotz bo, so lechatchila, you shouldn't use such a sandal for chalitza. V'imcholza chalitza sakshir. Now if you do use it, the chalitza is still going to be kosher. Sandal hamuchlet, now if you have a sandal that it is determined 100% that it is tameh with tzaras, so lo tachlotz bo, you can't use it for chalitza. V'imcholza chalitza sapsula, but if you use it, the chalitza is going to be puzzle in that case. Rav Papa Mishmei de Rava Amar. Now Rav Papa says in the name of Rava. Again, this is all in the name of Rava. The first opinion was Rav Papi in the name of Rava, and here it's Rav Papa in the name of Rava. He says, Echad sandal hamuskor v'echad sandal hamuchlet. Whether we're talking about a sandal that is quarantined, whether we're talking about a sandal that it's determined that it is tamei, lo tachlotz bo, you're not allowed to do chalitza with it. V'imcholza chalitza sakshera. But if you do chalitza with it, it's still going to be a chalitza that is considered to be kosher. And Rashi over here says, sandal hamuskar sheparcha bo hatzaras. We're talking about a sandal where there was saras. Lo tachlotz bo b'mei. So in the days that you're quarantining that sandal, you're waiting to determine to see if it spreads further, if it's actually tzaras. De lo leisi lemevid b'muchlat. Now really it should be fine. The reason why lechatchila it's not okay to use a sandal hamuskar is simply because we don't want you to come to use a sandal hamuchlat. V'imcholza chalitza sakshera. Now if you do it, it's okay. The lav bar streifu. The logic over here is that a sandal hamuskar does not need to be burned. V'shiyurei kai, so therefore it's considered to have the proper shear. It's considered a proper shoe. But muchlat chalitza psula. But if it's a muchlat, so then it's going to be considered a psula chalitza. The lisreifa kai, like Rashi just said, when you're talking about a muchlat, so then it's something that has to be burned, and therefore halachically it's like it's not even there. V'anon shiura ba'inan, we require to have a shear chofes rov raglo. There is a shear that's required. It has to cover the majority of his foot. V'aychsusei michtas shiurei, and over here, since it's something that halachically needs to be burned, so it's considered like the shear is going to be missing. And the Gemara continues, Meisve, we have a question from a Mishnah in Negoyim. It says, Bayis hamuskar, let's say you have a house that's quarantined, so the halacha is metame mitocho, so that's tameh from the inside of the house. If someone touches the walls on the inside of the house, they become tameh. Muchla, now if it's a house that's determined 100% that it has saras, so then the halacha is mitocho umeachorav, then it's metame from inside and also from the outside. Vizeh metamin bebiyah. Now both kinds of houses, they're metame when you enter the house. Rashi is going to bring psukim for all of these halachas. Now the Gemara says, now if you're going to say that something that is to be burned is considered like it's completely crushed, it's considered like it's not there, it has no shear, so in terms of the halacha of metamin bebiyah, so isn't the halacha that you have to come into the house? But here it shouldn't be considered a house, because again, the entire shear, the whole measurement of the house should be missing because it has to be burned. And so to this, the Gemara says, no, Shani Hasam, it's different over there. By tzaras of the house, it's different. The Yomar Krok, because the pasuk says, it says that he has to destroy the house, he has to break the house. Afilu b'shas netitza karoi bayis. And you see from this pasuk, even when you're breaking the house, like it says v'nosatz, still it's considered a bayis, it's still considered a house, and therefore in this particular case, by the bayis, it is still considered to be a bayis regardless, but it is no proof in the case of the sandal. And Rashi over here explains, mitame mitocho b'maga. Again, mitocho means that it's tameh if you touch the inside of the walls. Now that means even if his body didn't enter the house, just touching the inside of the walls makes him tameh. Again, if you would enter, you're tameh because of the pasuk of haboel habayis. But again, if he touches the inside of the walls, he's going to become tameh. Now, if you have a house that is for sure tameh with saras mitame af me'achorav, that's even going to be tameh the outside walls. Mitamin bebiyah, again, then they're both mitami if you enter the house. Im nichnas derech biyah, again, if he enters the house, kevan shenichnas rubo letocho tamei, when the majority of himself enters into the house, he is tamei mishum v'haboel habayis. That's learned from the pasuk of v'haboel habayis. Umikroy nafikalim b'Toras Kohanim. All of this is derived from these psukim in Toras Kohanim. Demuzgar mitame mitocho v'lo min achorav. Again, if you have a house that is quarantined, so it's tummy from the inside, not the outside. Uvamuchlik siv tummy hu hosav lo tumah acheres lo marloch shemitame me'achorav. By a muchlat, it says pasuk tummy hu. It's adding an additional tumah that it's also tummy from the outside. And the Gemara continues, Toshma, coming here a proof from the following Tosefta. Matlis sheyeshbo shalosh al shalosh. Let's say you have a rag that is 3 by 3 etzbos. Aval pi she'ein bo kezayis, even though it does not have a kezayis, meaning it's a very thin rag. Kevan shenichnas ruba lebayis tar. Once the majority of it enters into a pure house, talking here about a rag that has saras, it is tameh, and it's entering into a bayis tar. So timasu, so then it makes the house, it makes it tameh. And so the Gemara now says, my lav, is it not? What is the case over here? What kind of rag, what kind of tsaras does this rag have? So my lav, muchletas, aren't we talking about where it is 100% tameh with tsaras? So the Gemara says, lo no musgeris. We're actually talking about one that is just quarantined. It is not 100% tameh. In other words, the Gemara's initial proof was, we thought it was muchletes, and there seems to be a concept of rov. Apparently it does have a shear, even when it's muchletes. That was going to be the Gemara's proof, and therefore we can prove to our case as well, when we're talking about a situation of a shoe that is muchletes, it should be good for chalitza because it has a shear. And the Gemara then says, no, this Tosefta is not talking about muchletes, it's talking about musgeris, so it's completely irrelevant to our issue of a shoe with saras for chalitza. But the Gemara says, 1 second, if so, if you're going to say that we're talking here about a musgeris, amos seifa, let's look at the end of the same Tosefta. The Tosefta says, hayu bo kama zesim, let's say it's thick, it has many olives in it, it's the shear of many kezesim, so kevan shenichnas mimena kezayis labayis. Once a kezayis of this rag enters labayis tar into a pure house, so timaseyu, so it makes it tameh, makes the house tameh. So in other words, you don't need a majority, you just need a kezayis. And so the Gemara now says, Yamr b'shlama muchletes. Now, if you're going to say that this entire Tosefta is talking about a rag that has saras and it's saras muchletes, so hainu de iskish lameis, then it would make sense because muchletes, saras muchletes is actually compared to a dead body, and by a dead body you have a concept of a kezayis, so it makes sense that we would be talking about a kezayis, and again, then we would have a proof that there is considered a shear when you have muchletes. Eloyam and musgeris, but if you say this Tosefta is dealing with a rag that is musgeris, it's just quarantined, so amayis kishlamais, so what's the comparison to a mace? In other words, there would be no reason at all for kezayis to make any difference, so therefore it does seem that we're talking about muchletes. So the Gemara says you're right, we are talking about muchletes, but then again, why isn't it a proof to this issue in terms of the shear? So the Gemara says, Shani Hasam, it's different over there, Diyamar Kra, because the pasuk says, V'saraf es ha-beged, he burns the beged, and we learn out similar to what we said by the house, Afilu b'shas sreifa kori beged, even at the time that you're burning it, it's still called a beged. So over here again, there's a special pasuk that says that the shear is intact, even in a situation where it has to be burned. But the Gemara says, if that's the case, we might as well learn from there. If this beged is considered a beged, even though it needs to be burned, and we're talking about saras, so the same thing by a shoe that has saras. We should say that it's still considered to be a shoe. We should learn from the case over here of tumah to the case by chalitza to the case by the shoe. And so the Gemara answers simply, Isser mi tumah lo gamrin, and you can't learn out Isser from tumah. The discussion over here is in terms of tumah. The discussion by chalitza, that's in terms of, it's an Isser question, whether it's considered a shoe by chalitza or not. You cannot learn one from the other. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Hilchas the halacha is, Echad sandal hamuskar, v'echad sandal shamuchlat. It doesn't matter if it's a sandal that's quarantined, or if it's a sandal that is definitely tameh, v'echad sandal shal avodas kochavim, or whether it's a sandal of avodas zara, lo tachlots, you cannot use these for chalitza lichatchila, v'im chalza chalitza saksher, but if you do use them for chalitza, the chalitza is still going to be kosher, shal tikroves avodas kochavim. Now let's say it's used as an actual offering for the avodas zara, and we'll take a look at Rashi over here, matlas, we're talking about a rag, a beged hamenuga, it is a beged, and again it has saras, shalosh al shalosh, it's 3 by 3 etzbos, have a beged dechazi le'aniyim, at that shear, it's considered to be a beged because it is fit for poor people to use, she'ein ba kezayis shechut adak, if it's not a kezayis, meaning it's very thin, the strings are thin, kevan shenichnas ruba lebayis tar temaseh, once the majority enters into a pure house, it makes it tameh. And Rashi explains, Tima es kol klei habayis, meaning to say it makes all the vessels of the house tameh, the mitzora mitami bebia, because the mitzora is mitami when he enters the house, v'chein beged, v'evan hamenugas, the same is true by a beged, and an evan, a stone that has saras, kulon mitamim ba'oel, they're all mitami ba'oel, v'ha kevan da'ol ruba kakula dami, and here that's what we're saying, when the majority enters, it's as if the entire thing entered. My lav muchleta. So the Gemara says, is it not? We're talking about a muchleta. So afilu hachi amrit shadai miyuta shadib miyuta basaru. But nevertheless, we say that the miyut follows the majority. In other words, there's a concept of rove over here. V'havelei command da'ilakula. It's as if the whole thing went in. V'i command michtas adami. Now, if you're going to say that something with saras that's muchletas is considered completely crushed up and has no shiur, so zil basar ma da'il vein bebayis gimel al gimel. Then you should just follow the amount that entered the house, and you don't have a shiur of gimel al gimel. Hayu ba kama zaysim. Then it said at the end of the Tosefta, if it has many zaysim, meaning to say ve'ein ba ela gimel al gimel, meaning it's gimel al gimel, but it's thicker, so it's more than a kazayis. Ela shechuta of it's got thick strings. Kevan shenichnas heimeno kazayis lebayis timaso. Once a kazayis of it enters the house, that's enough to make it tameh. V'yav habishein kan beged. Even though you don't have a beged here, the halo al ruba, the majority didn't come in. That's still going to be enough, as we're going to say, because it's compared to a mace. Iyamr bishlama muchletas. If you say we're talking about muchletas, hainu d'metame b'kazayis, so kazayis makes sense. Afilu ein kan beged shalosh al shalosh. Even if you don't have the beged of shalosh al shalosh, mishum the muchlat iskish lemeis, because in general, tzaras that's muchlat is compared to a mace. Umeis metame b'kazayis, and a mace is metame b'kazayis. Ve'echa iskish. Now, where's this comparison between muchlat and mace? T'chsiv al nati kameis shemiriam muskeres havoy. The statement to Miriam was, "Don't be like a mace." Now, Miriam was quarantined. V'kamer le'Aaron l'Moshe, and Aaron was saying to Moshe, "Al no techolit shelo teikameis." Don't say that she's for sure tameh, meaning tzaras muchletas, because that's already going to be kameis. So you see from the pasuk, it's comparing muchlat to mace. So then the Gemara says, you're right, we are talking about muchlat. But by tumah we do say that the miyut, the minority, follows the majority. We don't say like it's all crushed up, because it says it has to be burned. Maybe you'll say it doesn't have a shear. And again, the Gemara said because there's a pasuk, even b'shas sreifa, it's considered a beged. And so the Gemara said, so why don't we learn from there to the case of l'inyan chalitza, to the case of the shoe, by chalitza, chash of shalim, it should be considered a full shoe. And the Gemara answered to that, Isur mituma lo garmin. We don't learn Isur from tuma, shehilchas tuma chidushu, because the halachas of tuma are considered a chidush. And then finally we said the halach is by avodas kochavim, so the chalitza b'diavad is still kosher. Shal avodas kochavim shenoa limoso letzelim beraglav. Rashi understands that to mean they would actually take the shoe and put it on the feet of the idol, kishemasiyan oso mimakom lamakom, when they move the idol from one place to the other. Chalitza asa kashera, that's going to be kosher. Now muchlat keda'amr. Now, first of all, by muchlat, it's like we said before. Why should it be? Why b'diavad would anyone say that the chalitza is okay by a shoe that has tzaras muchlat, tzaras muchletes? That's like we said, shafila b'shas reifa kari beged. We're really going with what we said before, that even at the time of burning, it's called a beged. But Rashi just says, V'lav meilafu. According to this, you don't have to say we're learning it out, because we already said we don't learn out Isser from Tumah. Ela gilei milsa bi'almahu. You could just say it's a gilei milsa. In other words, it's revealing to us that it's still called a beged, in other words, in Mitzias, but it's not really a limud. V'shal avodas kochavim nami. You can say by avodas kochavim also, hoel lihilucha ovid, since it's made in order to walk the idol, umeshamshei avodas kochavim lav l'sreifa kaimi. When it comes to something that services the idol, that's actually not something that has to be burned. Dislu takanta bebitel, because there is another solution, you can nullify it. V'imishum iser hana. Now, if you'll say, well, avodah zarah is asur b'hana, so maybe that should be a problem in terms of chalitza. In other words, forget about the whole issue here of sreifa, that it doesn't have a shear. Why aren't we saying that the iser hana is a problem in terms of chalitza for this sandal shel avodas kochavim? And so the Rashi says, lav hanohi, that's not a problem, because chalitza is not a problem, because it's not considered chalitza lav hanohi. Chalitza is not considered hana. The mitzvahs lav lehanos ninu, because in general, mitzvahs are not considered to be hana, and so therefore the Isra Hana is not going to pose a problem. And then we went on to say that Shel Tekroves Avodas Kochavim, that if you're talking about offerings of Avodah Zarah, in other words, the shoe is an offering, Sheik Rivu Umisaru Lefanav L'Shem Doron, in other words, you're bringing this sandal as a gift to the Avodah Zarah. V'kai Malon Tekroves Avodas Kochavim Ein La Bitul Olamis. When it comes to offerings to the Avodah Zarah, that actually can never be nullified. The Iskish Lameis, that's compared to a Meis Techsiv Ayochlu Zivchei Meisim Hilkach Lesle Takanta. Therefore, there is no solution over there. And therefore in this case it actually is missing a shear, and that's why when it comes to tekrovis avodas kochavim, even b'diavad, it's going to be a problem in terms of chalitza. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Dalid Amud Aleph.